Welcome to the Equity Institute's podcast on the purpose of public education with me, your host, Vincent Perez. Today, we'll be talking with Dr. Cory Gann. Cory is a longtime educator and educator of educators for the early years. His perspective on harnessing children's genius is inspiring, and I so appreciate Cory for all the wisdom he offers me in my career. Please welcome Dr. Cory Gann. Well, Cory, thank you so much for being here on our podcast about the purpose of public education. Could you, for our audience, tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and your connection to public education?
Sure. Well, I have been a teacher of young children for my whole career, and I have been a teacher of teachers who are heading for early childhood education. So I have been a preschool teacher, kindergarten, early elementary, and then was for many years on the faculty of a teacher education program. And really one of the cruxes of what I did was supervise in classrooms all along the I-5 corridor, just so many districts and hundreds of interns, practicum students, and observing in classrooms. My daughters also went through the Seattle school system, so I'm very connected with the system from the parent point of view.
So with all your experience, especially I think, your heart for the little ones, for those early learners, the young learners, what is the purpose of public education?
I really think that we have to consider whose interests we are thinking about when facing that question, because interests of the people who make the rules, the people who are in power, I would call the hegemony of society. I think that the purpose is pretty clear, which is to gain consent for the way things are, to sort of anchor the status quo, and to keep things under the wraps of the way things are. The best way to control is to get consent, and I think that's then there's the counter to that, which is what I think is the purpose of public education, which is to create resistance to that and to nurture a pathway of social change that is for the betterment of society and for equity in society. So that's the social, to really address the public welfare and to have us all moving in the direction of public welfare. Individually, the purpose of public education ought to be to nurture children and students to be self-actualized, critical thinkers who are practicing humanization in every way possible. So it's these opposing purposes that I think is really what describes the way schools and public education work.
I really appreciate the way you break down the question. And I've been very surprised and enlightened by how people interpret the question even. And so by interest, of the power, really kind of a capitalistic, view of ensuring we have workers and, this kind of concept versus being self-actualized, having a fulfilling, meaningful existence. Those are two different things, right? If they can align, right, beauty, right? If you can live your life in a purposeful way, in a vocation that not only allows you to be in our contemporary culture and pay rent and, take care of your kids. That seems a tough balance.
The values of the way things are set up is to delineate different roles and to create that hierarchy and to not have that questioned. And of course there are exceptions, which becomes the challenge, because people quote pull themselves up by their bootstraps, or that phrase of "you can be anything that you want to be." But I think one of the purposes of is to say, wait a second, there are examples of that, but how are things really stacked? And to really become awakened to that, it's that Paulo Freire phrase of conscientization, which becomes good to become aware of and that's a developmental progression of things. But even with young children, young children are so about what's fair and what's not fair. So that is the beautiful time to be talking about, wait a second, this is not fair, and what can we do about it?
I really appreciate that we innately know, right? We innately know what's fair and what's not fair, and then to grow that consciousness. And I really like the word to contextualize, right? How are we the way we are, right? And so the developmental learning and critique and critical thought around, where are we? How did we get here? Right? These questions can be developed in our curiosity at an early age.
Absolutely, Vincent. And I think that includes both how where we are at as a society, and you are totally correct, under a capitalistic system, which counts on people not really coming to an awakening about that. But also a awareness of the role of schools and how schools work.
You make me think about, when I think about what schools are really, what do we really teach? There's, to me, a whole element of compliance. And a simple story of a student being asked to go get a pencil. I just heard it this summer from a student leaving eighth grade, coming into ninth grade. The story that sticks with him is, I was told to go get a pencil. I walked over, I saw there were colored pencils. I wanted a colored pencil. Came back to my desk. Teacher said, no, go get a non-colored pencil. And the student refused. He said, I followed instructions, and then, of course, got in trouble. So I was like, what is that teaching? That's just some kind of strange compliance. So there's that side of things. And then what you're saying in terms of fulfilling and critical consciousness, what approaches or philosophies, frameworks, and have you seen really practiced or policies implemented that foster this self-actualization form of education?
But first, because that pencil example is such a good story. It's such a good story of there is an opportunity to say, okay, is this a case of defiance, or is this a case of creativity, or is this a case of that particular student bringing forth their creativity, or if you were the reacher for it, to really think about what's the whole picture. And I think that schools are so primed to worry about defiance and to worry about conformity, and that's part of the power structure is conformity. So models that counter that, models that really nurture the development and the creativity of children, I think, are what stands forth, what come forth. And there certainly are models out there. And they have lots of different names, such as discovery learning, or the project approach, or inquiry-based learning. Something that I'm very involved in is anti-bias education, which was really established for working with young children. But I think a lot of it comes under this umbrella term that early childhood really has offered, which is constructivism, which is that children's learning is about them constructing knowledge. It is not about filling up empty vessels. It's the opposite of that. That children come to school as thinking, knowledgeable, experienced people, and they're trying to put together what this whole school deal is about. And for young kids, what too much of the social order is saying is that school is for learning how to be in school. And so what you're supposed to learn is you get the right pencil, not that you that. And so I just love your example on that. But constructivism has to do with kids figuring out what's going on here. Either school is about, grading phrase of spirit murdering, which is what Bettina Love talks about, and she's talking about Black and brown children, but that can be applied to children, children in general. That can be applied to versus here is the beauty of your creative thought, and there's an opportunity for you to construct knowledge about that. So I really think of constructivism as one of those themes that, if it can be exploited, can be a wonderful thing inside of schools. And it does happen with early childhood, and it's looked at that way. But the weight of lessons and prescribed curriculums tends to weigh it down and push it out of perspective and out of scope.
Makes me think about trusting teachers, right? And just say, to know your students. And I think what the work you've been doing in teacher colleges, right? There's a whole element, I think, about how we're preparing educators to be with students, especially for those whose school worked well. It means they played that game pretty, they did well in that. And I'll say this, the last 2 days I've asked, what did we have? Probably about 170 teachers on this little, platform called Mentimeter. And it just makes a word cloud in real time as people enter their teachers. And I've asked, how did school make you feel? And the bigger the word, the more people are using it. On the first day with about 70 teachers, was anxious was the biggest word. Mm-hmm. And these are educators. These are actually everyone in the school system, from bus drivers to superintendent. And then yesterday, same question. And the two biggest words were smart and dumb, bored, and then a whole other things like outcasted, and even the smaller the words, suicidal. And it was just really heartbreaking. We took a moment, and Kim acknowledged, wow, let's just hold this for a moment. If you had this experience in our school system, in our K-12 system, let's just pause and acknowledge that was really difficult for you. And at the end of the day, she got recognized and said, hey, thanks for seeing us. Thanks for seeing how hard this was for us. So when you mentioned Dr. Bettina Love's concept of spirit murder, that's kind of the question I'm asking is, what did it do for your spirit? Did it lift it? Did it empower your spirit? And then, another quote is, it crushed it. It crushed my spirit.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. Go ahead.
Well, but you know what it also makes me think of is when I think about the so many pre-service teachers that I worked with, and then people who would get positions and would get jobs, and the first day of school is rolling around, and how they feel as the teachers in that. And anxiety is, of course, there's an element of anticipation and looking forward into, but anxiety, and what it reminds me of is that a lot of anxiety has to do with parents and family and the community, and I'll have my kindergarten kids. That is not. It's that anxiety, and it speaks to me that one of the hopes of public schools and public education is to create real systems where family engagement is happening, and where teachers and families feel like a partnership, as opposed to these worlds apart, which is how it's really spoken, that there's worlds apart. And there are efforts in school to create family engagement, but they are so they're such an infancy to have real family engagement, where families feel like we're sending our kids to be with you for this long period of time, and not only do we have that trust, but we are really, really looking forward to it. And I think all of that fits with what you're saying, is that anxiety is really there, and parents believe they are sending their smart kids to school, and they want that to be endorsed. They don't want to learn that my kids are in the Sparrows group, which everybody knows is the group that is behind, and that kids are from the get-go going to be categorized into these different hierarchies.
You mentioned I'm sending my smart child to school, right? So we as parents can recognize, because we're with our children so often, the inclinations and talents and interests, right, of our own children, and schools don't always recognize that.
Well, and I mean, it's a place to say that in constructing, children from the get-go will enter the school building and grounds constructing, is this a place for me to be me, or is this a place for me to be who it is I'm supposed to be here, that I can park at the door when I get off the school bus and then return to. And kids carry that message. At every moment is a window to say, I see you, or every moment is a day, is an opportunity that kids are going to construct to say that window is closed. So I like the word genius, and I think the function of school is to nurture the genius of the children who are in that classroom, and that's not what happens for the most part. So that's the mission.
I love that question. Is this a place where I can be me?
Yeah.
There's really something about that.
Yeah. And that takes a creative bent where teachers are moving away from the formula of what you're supposed to do, which is that every kid gets to be star of the week, and they get a poster with a picture and an answer to what their favorite food is. Move, and there's nothing wrong with. I mean, those are nice activities, but every day when teachers can say, "Oh, I remember what you did yesterday," and and show that curiosity and open the window to and kids will read that. They will read that at their grade level and beyond. They will read those kinds of messages.
One of the messages I've been sharing with educators is that, especially as all these projects I get as the school year starts, is that education, especially compulsory schooling, right, does not equal intelligence. Students are already coming to us intelligent, and in this, especially in this country. Especially, I call it the letters, right? The degrees. You just even from a diploma or an associate's or a bachelor's, you get those letters. And when we have students interrogate this question about our family's educational history and what it means to me, and I ask educators the same question: can you tell us about your family's educational history, formal schooling, and what it means to you? We have to ask the other question: is how else have you constructed knowledge? What other learning and lessons happen that are not tied to school, but are life-giving? And my question then becomes like, well, how does then the house of learning, the places we call schools, open up for this? Exactly what you're talking about. You have expertise in the early learning years. I'm curious how you've seen this kind of challenge being taken on, and what calls to action you might have for folks listening to this conversation.
So it's so important for people who consider themselves educators, and in a way we are all educators. We in some way we all fit that bill of being educators, is to build our own knowledge of what the activity of learning is all about. And the educational environments that children have been in, whether or not they conform to the standard, you go through school and you do K-12, and then you do postgraduate, and you go through that whole system. But that the kind of learning that happens from being a good person and a person who has skills and has knowledge and can make a family work and can make relationships work, and to develop that kind of respect, to develop to really go counter to the hierarchy of professionalism versus other kinds of work and careers, and the knowledge that the funds of knowledge. That's a term. If teachers can develop a respect for funds of knowledge, then I think that democratizes the situation.
How have you seen that being tapped? This concept of funds of knowledge, whether either in your career or in the teachers that you teach.
There are so many ways that it can happen, and certainly ways that I have seen it happen. A good example is music. Who are the teachers who ask, what's the music in your household? Like if you just went into a school and lined up teachers and said, like, what I want to know is what you know about the music or other forms of artistic expression that are in the households of the children that you work with. That does happen on occasion. I have seen that, but it's far from a standard kind of practice. And then you could take that for every form of learning. What are in what way are mechanics? Do mechanics occur in your? Who's working on cars? Who's working on bicycles? Who's working on this? And it's not just sort of like what are your hobbies, but the everyday experiences that are part of the lives of all our children are ways that those kinds of connections can be made.
For these professional development sessions I'm doing with teachers, we're working with students, and there was a student talking about her mom who's an entrepreneur and going to establish her own salon here in the next few months, weeks, I think. And I just thought the amount of chemistry that a hairdresser has to know and be with and hold all these chemicals, in terms of their care. I was like, she's a chemist. She's an entrepreneur. There's all these aspects to what it takes to run a small business like that carries a whole, rich funds of knowledge, but is not always recognized by, the teachers of the student.
That it's a great, and it makes me one of the something that I haven't touched on is the whole idea of project approach as a way of organizing curriculum, and that does happen. There are examples, and those are hopeful examples of the project approach. But tackling an issue because that's the interest of the class, and that's the interest, and that's where the class is going, and to bring in all the different areas and all the different subjects, the science of it, the chemistry of it, the art of it, the history of it, the meaning of it. And one of the examples I was thinking of is the whole idea of hair and a salon and how that's treated. I just read recently something I did not know, which is that one of the strategies that people who lived under slavery, one of their strategies was that the way that hair was braided had a communication significance to other people, including access to the Underground Railroad, and just it was sort of like an entire signaling system. So there's a piece of history, but we all have all of our history. I'm Jewish American, and in conservative Orthodox Judaism, the long locks of hair are really, really significant. They're called payas, and families have these histories just about that, and imagine that would be a line of knowledge pursuit, and how all the skills can be incorporated in that kind of. So that salon example is a really good example.
That's so rich. The history of hair. Wow, that's right. Talk about project-based learning. There's a whole. It could
Right.
probably be a whole semester.
Right.
I like to close these interviews with the question back to your own experience. So, how did your public education impact you personally?
It impacted me by giving me an early sense of things are not right. So I went to school in New York City. It was the school system was very segregated, and it's very segregated now. And how can that be? I mean, I was in public school in the late 50s. I went to high school. Enough of dating myself, but the awareness of the segregation of things is something that I had that early experience, and I had that early experience of there's something not right, that I had to like bring my intellectual powers as I grew and learned. But that's the first thing I think of when I think about my own how schooling affected me, was this sense of. And then I hadn't thought of this, but just referring back to your survey of students and teachers, that I always experienced anxiety in school from the get-go. I experienced anxiety, and I experienced a sense of being different, in the sense that I was a shy kid, and I wasn't doing I wasn't playing on the playground the way that all the other kids. So it gave me a message of you're not joining the pack. You're not sort of like on board with the system. And so those were sensitivities that I then carried with me as I went for further schooling through high school and beyond.
So, how did that impact your choice in this profession? Like, what called you to the field?
What called me to the field was that I learned that not only did I have a capacity for play, I had a real capability for play, and it's something that I had to discover late in my learning process as a younger person. So I ended up driving a school bus, and when I was on the school bus, I would kid around with the kids, and I'd watch the teachers, and I would say, "I can do that. Why can't I can do that even better?" And so it was, in a way, it was like a recouping. It was a recouping of my sense of childhood and the sense of how important it is that play is part of kids' experiences, and just sort of that lightness is the way that it affected me. And then just a constant awareness that grew as I learned and I read more books, and I did a constant awareness about the way society is segregated, and the way that people are distributed according to these capitalistic evaluations. And then I learned to associate academic knowledge and academic language to all of that. But it's one of those things that once you see it, there's no going back. Once you see it, once you see the inequities of what's happening in a school in this location versus what's happening in a school in an entitled location, is just becomes this absolute aggravation, constant aggravation.
I really appreciate the themes here today, Cory. That I'm taking away when I think about being with young people, being with fellow educators, fairness and play. Like if we just kind of, hold those two, considering the segregation, considering all of the social ills, and really thinking about fairness, what a simple, clear concept. Because we know it, right? We know it. And then play. Just that engagement and the lightness, especially in this kind of heavy time, I think. And especially when I think about what schools are doing to prepare the students for what's coming, right? So think about global crisis and just so many social problems and environmental problems to solve, right? If we can hold fairness and play, that might lean into some new solutions.
I do think so. And I would add the word joy to there, to have joy, and what we can't do is allow ourselves to be usurped with the sense of, well, then that doesn't mean real learning, or that doesn't mean rigor, or that means softening up and squishing around the standards, because I think that there is absolute rigor and even more intense learning when that's the approach that is that includes that idea of play and joy as really speaking to the internal motivations of what children are about, and that school can pick up on that, and that achievement will fly even better when schools would do it that way.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this conversation, and so grateful. Thank you so much, Cory.
Very fun for me. So thank you. And I'm anxious to see the culmination of all of this. Thanks, Vincent.